One physicist I interviewed said that this was his favorite evidence for survival, strongest evidence. He gave me other examples, but this was his favorite. And it has to do with the living Grandmaster, Victor Korchnoi, and I couldn't find a picture of Robert Rollins on Google Images, but he's the medium, automatic writing medium, who brought through, allegedly, Geza Morachi, a Hungarian Grandmaster from the early 1900s. Now, I'm curious, how many people have heard about this case? Please raise your hand. I'm just curious how much this is known. Okay, less than half, and I think everybody ought to read this because it's such a fascinating case. I'm not saying you have to come down one way or the other on the evidence, but I've got the references here in JSPR, April 2006 and July 2007. And the reason this is such an interesting case is it's not just that Robert Rollins, who didn't know how to play chess before this started, by the way, not only brought through information that showed knowing that, in other words, a lot of information that was hard to get at about Morachi's life, but also knowing how. I mean, how did he manage to play a high-level chess game? So read all the details. It's quite amazing. And so that's one perspective from the one physicist I interviewed. And yet when I asked the sociologist about the same case, he just dismissed it. He said, I'm not impressed with that at all. We don't know the limits of human capability. And he said that the evidence about from spirit mediums, the things that spirit mediums tell us are very trivial, I guess like what this baby pig has told us. And he does safe research. He's in an anomalous experiences research unit, but he does conversational analysis, how people talk about their experiences with mediums, which sounds a little more legitimate, even though this is a pretty wild and woolly sociology department that he's in. By comparison, it is, compared to most ones. I don't want to say anymore, I'm not giving, you can figure out who most of these people are probably, but I can't really do them justice in a short talk, so I'm leaving their names out. But I will mention them in my book that'll come out in about 7 years probably, and in a DVD documentary about this, when they've given me permission. So I just thought that was interesting to see how strikingly different people's attitudes were about these cases. I interviewed 2 paranormal investigators who started out saying they were 100% convinced that EVP was from the other side. But as we talked more and more, they said, you know, I don't think we can convince the scientists. I think we've convinced a lot of relatives of the people whose voices came through from the other side. And they also said, you know, I'm not sure that we can separate universal consciousness. Oops, I left out an S. I really proofread this a lot, but I left out an S in consciousness. How do you tell the difference between universal consciousness and survival? Maybe it's a one phenomenon. And they're kind of skeptical of mediums, but that's not true of all paranormal investigators who use EVP. So there's a lot of variability. Now this sociologist, even though he's a friend of mine, I could not get him on task. I had an awful time, and what he says is quite fascinating about anomalous experiences being related to shamanic healing and the origin of religion, but it was so hard to get him back. I said, thank you, but can you play the science game here and tell me what would be good evidence? And he said, well, the evidence for survival in parapsychology is really inadequate. And then you go back to what he wanted to say again, which is that what really counts is the psychological benefits, the medical benefits of anomalous experiences. This was really interesting. This parapsychological research unit, somewhere in the Eastern Hemisphere, I found was very, see this is a little bit off because I have a Mac. Some of the lines are not quite right. Anyway, I could really see the social control system involved here because they're very highly skeptical. They didn't want to talk about survival much, and there's been put in place a research assessment system at the university in which they evaluate not just individuals but whole departments. And so there's a pressure for this department to do only work that's going to be easier to publish in mainstream journals. So there's a lot more to do. And I'm sad to say that so far it seems like it's more about the framing than about the evidence. I guess I shouldn't have been surprised as a sociologist. But this is a very important question, and I'm going to get to the bottom of this, I think. And that's my hope. That's my my dream, to read all these things and somehow I'll get the Holy Grail when I'm done reading all these things and interviewing people. But I have to realistically say, this may be a case of ironic science. John Horgan, I didn't want to even read the book with a title like The End of Science. So this is going to be another one of those things about closing down the patent office. But it's a very interesting book to consider. So The End of Science, in there he talks about ironic science. Is this a kind of unanswerable question where we can't get empirical evidence given the limits of human science? I hope that's not true, but we shall see. And I'll let you know, but maybe we don't have to wait very long, because later this afternoon, Bruce Grayson is going to tell us maybe, is postmortem survival a scientific hypothesis? Thank you. Switch it off.
I don't know how to do it.
Which way does it go, Mark? You got it.
Okay. Thank you, Charlie. We have time for lots of questions.
I love it. I love what you just presented. It was great. Okay. And I just want to say, in your first slide, under psi, you can add psychometry.
Yes.
And the other thing I wanted to say is that I've been doing paranormal stuff and been involved in research for 31 years, and I've never seen anything that couldn't be proven with current science. So I don't see why the two can't be in agreement and pursue the good, the bad, and the ugly.
So you're saying that this is going to work out?
Oh, yeah.
Oh, good.
So as you talk to these folks and get that perspective, how often or to what degree does the role of theory come up in conversation? I mean, people say, well, there's no theoretic framework for which these things can be made, and that's the problem. What they focus on theoretic frameworks, more focus on that. Evidence, right. And they put the evidence in the context of the framework, you get to talk about framework.
People talk a lot about the lack of being able to show a definite mechanism, which I guess is related to your issue of how theoretically does this actually happen. But they seem to be all over the place on different ways to approach the problem. But in the literature, of course, there's a whole lot more that I haven't even talked about very much. But there are problems on all levels, but I'm not sure exactly how to answer that. But
well, I'm trying to probe, because at least, my anecdotal experience interacting with folks is that
they very rarely actually explicitly talk about theoretic
problem. I understand.
There is no theory.
That's probably true. Yeah, that was probably a fair statement.
First, Dave, and then kind of.
Developing a theory, in my way of thinking, is one of the latter steps. First is observation, and second is experimentation. The theory can wait. Not forever, but it can wait.
Yeah, and another thing that should be said is that in a lot of cases you've got theory that's consistent, data that's consistent with various theories. And then you try to think of, well, what would be evidence that would eliminate one of the theories? Right?
Next.
Oh, hang on.
I'm interested in how many of the people you spoke with, either because you probed or because you volunteered, veered off into the area of, well, my personal experience is such and such, and from that, I conclude such and such.
Well, they veered off into it because I asked them to do it. Because I wanted to know that. That's part of the sociology of science, is trying to figure out, or sociology of knowledge, what was it that happened to you? What was it that happened to you in 7th grade that you think this way, right?
So
that's the kind of thing.
How does that correlate? How they answer that correlate with the position that they take?
Well, it's all over the place, but I did find a few people who said they had no early experiences. They came to this intellectually. They were skeptics and so on. My UFO researchers, over half of them said they had a UFO experience. And so I have a very small sample right now, but I suspect that it's going to be something like that too, because this is an area of research where you're taking risks. And so where's the reward to take the chance and do the research? So a lot of people have had an experience that leads them to that.
Okay, Jay?
I'd like to point to two pieces of literature that are somewhat related to your field. One of them is the New England Journal of Medicine.